friends. Welcome to the Bincast, where small talk comes to die. This is take two, actually, with my dear friend Trixie. We were recording, then my
Yeah.
phone died, and she was just getting to some juicy parts. But we are happy to just cover a bit of the bases that we've already covered together because I already know my dear friend Trixie really well. But I want you guys to meet her. I want you to hear her story because I think on a year like this, especially, hers is a story that's going to inspire a lot of hope and encouragement after you've heard some of the things she's had to navigate through. So, Trixie, welcome to the Bincast again.
Again.
That is awesome.
Too fun.
All right, so the first time around, I got you to introduce a little bit about you and yourself, but this time I'm going to do that because, yeah, you've done that once already.
Yes, recap it.
This is a dear friend of mine. She is part of the small cohort of friends that I spend time with in these times. A dear friend that I am getting to admire and love and appreciate for not only our friendship, but also a lot of the things that I'm learning from her as we continue to grow in that friendship. Trixie is a mom. She's a single mom now. She is the mom of two boys. I've already forgotten, 9 and 7, right?
Yep. Yep.
Oh, good. So I've met both of her boys, and they are delightful. And both of her boys are on the autistic. Is that an appropriate way to say, Trixie, that they're on the autistic spectrum, or is there a different way of describing
Yeah,
them
just on the autism spectrum.
on the autism
That
spectrum?
works. Or under the autism umbrella, if you want to be lyrical.
Awesome. And she's a full-time mom there. She is now. You're not the oldest, are you, of your sisters? You've got
I
two
am
sisters.
the oldest of my sisters.
I for some reason I was thinking like you look so young for your age. You're you just had your birthday, your 37th birthday.
Yep.
And I know I get a lot, Trixie, that I do not look my age. I keep on having to remind myself that you're even in your 30s. It's just like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Yeah. That's taking me some getting used to still. So welcome again to the Bincast, Trixie. Thank you for being here, making the time, and being a part of what I do here.
I'm excited. I'm glad
Okay,
to be
so
here.
we were talking a little bit here about. I'm just going to go through my notes here again because I do write notes. I usually start off with a blank slate, but already we've been in the midst of some of our conversation. Trixie, I was asking you about patience and why you were saying patience is really critical for you. So tell us about why you believe patience is a really important aspect of parenthood.
I believe it's a very important aspect of parenthood, just because it's you have to you have to remember that these are young people learning,
Mm.
and you know being I find if you're short with them and then you try and like my brain is having a moment. If you're short with them, I find that it's not really helpful. It's not being very helpful to kind of like come down on them, and having patience because they're still, and especially with having the two boys on the autism spectrum, is that I get an awful lot of it really takes them a while sometimes for things to like set in,
Mhm.
um, especially with like just even day to day dealing with like my youngest will go, what? And then I'll say something and then he'll just go, what? And I'll just say it exactly the same. And it's just like it doesn't really completely register in.
Mhm.
And getting mad at him for that is not helpful because it will just create stress. And then he's definitely not going to be able to be processing what I'm going over with him at that time. And with their eating. Like eating is something that I really learned how to put exercise patience on. Um, I recently had a conversation with a food psychologist, and she tuned me in on something called super tasters. And it's often that people on the autism spectrum they have their senses are very sensitive, and so when they taste something, it's kind of an assault on their taste buds a lot of the time. So that affects how they eat. And it's not because they don't want to eat or because they're actually just being picky eaters, it's because it's actually like an attack on their senses to eat certain foods and to try new things. It's very stressful and anxiety inducing. And learning that after struggling with their eating habits for a large number of years was kind of a relief, but it kind of also made me really glad that I didn't choose food as one of those things where I do or die on. Because I've been able to honor them more in by being patient with them. I've been able to honor them better, so that they are more comfortable and more assured of themselves as small people.
Yeah, sure. Now, I asked you this question, but in the first round, in reference to the source of your patience, if it was one of those things you had before you had kids, or if it's one of those things that developed through having kids and the challenges that come there. You were saying that patience definitely evolved as you learning to be a
I
parent.
learned it. I learned it. Like I thought I had patience. Like I thought I was fairly patient when I was younger, but having kids and especially having kids with special needs has really taken my patience and put it to like above and beyond. I find like because sometimes I get impatient. I want to like go. You're running a little late. Just like gotta get the kids to hurry up. I find that I'm less inclined to feel that way now as much,
Yeah.
unless like school's at this time and we're definitely having a bit of a dilly dally day.
Yep.
But like I'm not that. I don't find those things very stressful. Like my kids will like Marius could ask me what 5 times in a day, and definitely when I was younger, that would have annoyed the hell out of me. I have a lot of patience for kids
Yeah.
now, and so it's just like, yeah, no, it definitely was something learned through practice and through understanding.
Yeah.
Um, when you learn that understanding that each kid is different,
Mm-hmm.
um, you have to parent a child. What parenting strategies you use for one child won't work for the other. Um,
Yeah.
and you have to have patience for that because it's like, oh, this is my plan, this is my go-to, and then if that derails, then that becomes very frustrating. But you can't get frustrated in those moments because if you're frustrated and trying to parent, then sometimes I find like that the message it doesn't come across very well sometimes. So you have to go
You're
back and revisit those things.
you're making me remember something as well, Trixie. When before I was a parent, I had some very narrow ideas of what good parenting looked like, and I would apply those to other parents I would see out and about, whether in the
Mm-hmm.
store or on the airplane or in the airport. Kids that were just seeming loose cannons, and I'd be like, "Oh, those parents." And then it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't until I had my own kids that I was like, "Huh, I have a lot more patience."
Yeah.
Because now I'm in that trench. I remember when me and my ex were with our kids on the airplane, for example, and we're trying to console our little one. All of a sudden, I was reflecting on all those other times when I was thinking of other parents who were in the same boat, and was like lacking in that sense of um, acknowledging the challenge that was theirs. Right? It's like
Yeah.
maybe it wasn't as
There's
simple as I
there's
thought.
a lot more empathy to be had for other parents when you have gone through it yourself.
Yes, yes.
Because yeah, I definitely had some really entertaining times on the airplane with mine as well.
Okay,
Like
okay.
the ascending and descending and like that pressure in their ears, and it's just like there's
Pressure.
nothing I can
I
do, and they're just
know.
so sad, and you're like, oh.
And they're inconveniencing everyone around them too. But you're like, hey, this is just part of what it means, right? So, for
Mm-hmm.
a lot of my young listeners, if you're listening and you don't have kids yet, extend a bit of kindness and patience towards those parents who are trying the best they can, because the thing is, Trixie, you would agree with me when you say there never was a playbook that gives you an itinerary, like instructions on how to raise kids, because they're so different, aren't they?
Yeah, like in many ways, like if there is a book on
Yes.
how to be a good parent, it comes from your kids.
That's a powerful
And
point. What do you mean by that?
well, so basically, like kids are very good at mirroring what they see.
Sure.
Um, so But a lot of the times too, like, they all have their little individual attitudes and things like that, their preferences, their tendencies. You know, when your kid's having a tantrum, why are they having that tantrum? Well, it's usually because they're feeling very dishonored in the moment. Now, what an adult considers dishonored at the moment and what a kid feels is dishonoring are going to be on totally different spectrums. And sometimes people forget that, because like one of the things that I practiced a lot is I never really just like snatched toys away from my kids. I wouldn't do that, because it's just like, oh no, you can't have that right now. And it was and then, but they get upset and they cry. They're letting you know right now. It's like, I'm feeling very dishonored right now. Like I had this thing, it was mine, and you just took it from me. And as when you look at it that way, it's just like, yeah, of course they're going to be upset and mad at you for those things. So because I kind of like had those little realizations that, they're telling you how they're feeling. It's just, we don't have that communication established. And there's all of those things that you have to watch and really get into their shoes when you're going through those moments, especially like with early stuff like that. So
And something else I was hearing in what you were saying there, Trixie, is the real pathway to becoming a good parent is through the hard work of learning the uniqueness of each child and what they need from you, right? So if there was a book, it'd be easy just to say, hey, this is exactly what she needs to follow the protocol. And the reality is, who of us follows a protocol, if any, based on who we are? You know what I'm saying? And so why not extend that to our kids, which demands the hard work, really, of learning how to listen, learning how to understand, learning how not to jump to conclusions, learning how to draw out from them information that helps us better understand what their present need is instead of what our convenience demands. Oh, like lots of these things that are just demanding selflessness, which is not always the easiest thing, is it?
No, it's not. It can be quite challenging because it does require a lot of like role playing, because you have to look at it from their perspective and then help them manage that too. Like my kids, I call them emotional trains. So if they get derailed and they're distraught, they can be in that state for hours. And it was like that when they were like 3 or 4. That was definitely a thing. It was like they were just distraught, and I couldn't distract them. I couldn't really cheer them up, but at the same time, I couldn't communicate with them why they were so upset about it. So it's kind of like really hard. And this is again patience. I had to patiently be with them while they kind of navigated their own emotional tunnel train, because they have to get to that end. I can't make them get to that end. They have to find that on their own. And so just being able to be there and be a support while they're having that train is really important. And they're helpful in their emotional resiliency. But yeah, okay.
Back to when they were born, most people are hoping and praying for healthy kids that don't have any physical challenges or mental challenges in their development. Um, when did you discover that your kids were on the autism under the autism umbrella?
We when they were 5. And I was like, that's actually pretty late in considering that a lot of kids can get their diagnosis at the age of 3 or so.
Yeah.
A lot of the reason why we were kind of late in finding those things was because we were in the United States, and in order to get those diagnoses down there, you had to pay for them.
Right.
So when we came back to Canada, and my kids were speech delayed. They were delayed, which I was expecting. Myself went through speech delay. My husband also, or my ex husband at the time, he was also kind of speech delayed too. So we were expecting like a little slower social development to at least present. That, and I had the knowledge that boys typically language wise develop slower than girls. But what I was missing is I didn't see how much behind they were until I got around into a group of peers and we had the teachers were like, we should probably take a look at this. I wanted to get him Genesis looked at as soon as we came back. It was like one of the first things we did was we scheduled for language diagnosis and stuff like that. And so, yeah, we didn't find out that they were, and we, for the first little bit too, we didn't think our youngest was going to be on the autism spectrum either, because he just expresses it so differently and he seemed more socially geared than my oldest. And so he was like, no, he's probably just fine. But no, like the next year for him, a couple of years later, yeah, he got the same diagnosis.
See, when they got the diagnosis, like what went through in your mind? Were you like resolved to say, okay, this is what we're working with, or was it a season where you had to work through some emotions because you weren't going to get what you're hoping for without having to deal with autism that your kids were diagnosed with?
It was a hard pill to swallow, I think, for sure. When I first got the diagnosis, like I cried. Mm. Growing up as somebody with like language difficulties, like, a part of me my brain just flashes like, I've got to protect my kids from these things that happen when you deal with language delay and things like that. And so that was just like, I have my own experiences where, like the teachers are very keen at like getting you off the help, right? They don't want you to have the supports and stuff like that. Not that they don't want you to have them. They want to get you to the point where you don't need the supports, which means you're level with your peers. And one of the things that people don't fully realize with autism is that it never goes away. It's always there. And so you always, in many ways, need supports. Mm-hmm. And you need help and you need assistance and guidance. And sure you can get into a point where, especially because they're verbal, right? I'm lucky in the way that my kids are verbal. They can communicate. But like, it's like I realized too at that point too, I have to be an advocate. I get to be an advocate for my kids in their learning and academic processes, and I have to look out for their. It's like you sign up for a fight almost. you have to be an advocate for them. You have to be an advocate for them, even from like your family, because sometimes other family members, especially if they haven't had any experience with people on the spectrum, then it is very much like sarcasm. Sarcasm is something that my kids don't really pick up on. They don't understand on it. And like listening to one of my family members on my ex's side, he used to comment a lot of times that he used to just like make fun of this one guy that he found out that was on the spectrum. And he'd make all the sarcastic humor, and he was just so amused that he wasn't getting the humor. But then he realized that he was actually being kind of a bully that way. And because this guy isn't understanding, and I'm poking fun at his expense for these kind of things. So it's just like, it's like all those kind of things that kind of went through my head. It was like, I have to protect my kids so that they can have a good chance at getting a life that they potentially might want.
Yeah. Trixie, for those of my followers who don't understand what it's like to interact with those on the spectrum, how would you describe, I guess, in general tones and nuances, the struggle that is on the part of those who have autism?
There's just a lot of things they don't get. I live in a very literal world as a result of my kids. So I have to say things exactly how I mean. I can't, like, things like passive aggressive behavior, it goes right over their heads. They don't understand. They don't understand it. Like, I have a sister who's also on the autism spectrum. At the time, they didn't find it until she's 21. Like, she's in her 20s when she got her diagnosis. But like, I even think about like my interactions with her is just like, she just doesn't get social graces. My youngest will get right up in your personal bubble and not really when he's comfortable with you, but like a lot of the times there's some very inappropriate behaviors that people on the autism do, but they don't understand that. They have to be told those things, that it's okay. Like when you touch somebody, you need to get their consent to touch them. You don't just go around licking somebody. Because they'll do, like my youngest, he'll just come up to me and he for a while he would just lick me, just random. And then I was like, okay, we don't just make, he's like, this is okay with mommy because me and you are family, but you don't go around licking kids at school. Or he would pretend to be a puppy at school for a bit. He was actually like all four legs and just kind of like walking around and being a puppy dog. And it's like, we don't play that game at school. He's just doing what he wants to do.
Sure. So a huge part then is the challenge of being misunderstood by those who don't understand much about what is going on in their minds.
Yeah, there's a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of sometimes people take a lot of liberty thinking what people are. What is the word I'm looking for? A lot of liberties are taken based off of their actions. Like they're different. They're and it's obviously so. Like there's kids on the autism spectrum that really get into spinning things, or they're the ones that make random loud noises, or they'll have the ones that do the head hitting against the wall when they're children. And people look at that and they're like, is that normal? Like, what's going on there? And it's just like a lot of judgment, and like it's not helpful. It doesn't help because you're just it adds pressure as a parent to have to deal with those things from outside people.
Yeah, no, I totally see that. I was working in one of my previous contexts with this one individual who was on the spectrum, and his expressions, like they call it S words, stimmies, or they're like, so what he would do is he would just kind of hit himself.
Oh yeah, he's overstimulated.
It's overstimulated, yeah. So that's kind of what he would do, and it would make people around him really feel awkward because they did not understand, again, right, why he was doing this kind of thing. And so there's just that break in understanding on both sides to be able to figure out how do we go forward on this. So I can totally understand what that looks like. I really enjoyed working with him. We got really close. I became like trusted for him, on one of those trusted individuals. He was very like hard on himself when he would hit himself, for example, but he was super gentle when anyone else was around. So like if you tried to come close, he would just all of a sudden be like really gentle in the way that he was interacting with you. But it wasn't until I met another individual. This individual was on the spectrum, but in a high functioning way, which meant that, from my understanding, that you may not have been able to know that she was on the spectrum because she just seemed normal, right? But she was really helpful to help me understand what the challenge is, especially in the mind space of those who have autism. In the way that you were saying, they're overstimulated. For some, it's just the light in the room, for example, or the sounds. Whereas we can hear like different gradations of sounds that I can probably hear a hammer down the block, or the music in my room, and you can hear like the various levels. For them, it's just like boom, everything at once, and it's just like a cacophony of confusion that they're trying to work their way through. And so it's just that overwhelm that you were telling me about there too. So I found that super helpful when I interacted with her, hearing the insider perspective of, now she was able to help articulate what it's like, right? But a lot of these individuals don't have that access to communication to say, here's what's going on, They're just kind of in the midst of it.
Yeah, that kind of just reminds me of like some of my early experiences with my kids. Like going to the mall bathroom was a nightmare.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was just so loud. And like my kid, we tried to go to the washroom. We'd walk in, and then the toilet flushed, and he just ran out of that room screaming. Like
Yeah.
he was just too much,
Yeah.
too loud,
Yeah.
and he couldn't. He was just overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
And he can go to the bathroom now in a mall, but like he still complains that it's too loud.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's too bright or whatever. So for a while there, I'd actually like have shades for him that he could just plop on and wear whenever he felt like things were too bright outside or things were. It's just like you have to work with that sensory play, um, and that moderation. So like even in the car, I
Mm-hmm.
can't when they're in the car, I can't play my music very loud because it gets too loud for them.
Yeah.
And it might be like fine for me, but it definitely, yeah.
Excellent. Do you feel, as a mom of autistic boys, you are doing, in some sense, a little bit more than the average parents because you're attending to a lot more unique needs that they have?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Definitely. And the funny thing is too, is like I don't really realize it until I see other parents or see other kids. Um, and that's where the perspective really comes in because that's my normal. All I've known is parenting two children with special needs. Um, one of the most powerful moments when I realized and how uh, behind and where their speech communication was one time I was at home by myself with kids, and I lived in a very very small town, very small. It's like 5,000 people, and so we had there were some kids in the neighborhood, and this little, I swear she had to be like 3 or 4, but she came over, she knocked on my door, and she opened up the door, and I opened up the door, and there's this little girl and this wet kitten, and she wanted me to help her dry off her kitten because the kitten was wet, so the kitten needed to be warm. I knew the little girl; she lived right across the street. I was like, okay, well, let's just make sure mom knows that I've got you over here. And so I brought her into the house. I got a towel for the kitten, and she would not stop talking to me. And it was such an alien feeling for me because my kids, like, that's one of the things with kids on the autism spectrum is that they're not very engaging. They
Mm-hmm.
don't do a lot of that engaging in their early years. There was never really much of this, mom, look at this toy, or mom, watch me jump off the couch, mom, watch me do this. That invite never really happened. And so here is this 4-year-old girl inviting me to do all of these things with her and this kitten. And she's showing me toys that she's found in my house and is showing me. I'm like, this is what the pediatrician was talking about. Like, this is what the invite to engage looks like, and how, a lot of kids really just want to show off, show you, and bring you into their world.
Mm-hmm.
Mine don't do that. They still very much so don't do that. Like, only recently, in this last year, my youngest has been very keen about having me play Minecraft with him. And that's like, oh yay, my kid wants to engage with me. But a lot of times, like, yeah, no, I like being invited to play. That's something I didn't really experience, and still, in many regards, I think I get that experience less than uh, a parent with atypical children, or neurotypical children. Sorry.
Yeah. Trixie, I'm going to make a segue at this point here, just because I
Okay.
still want to make sure we have time as well. 2020 has been, like we were saying earlier, a year to remember for the world. And usually for the wrong reasons, because there are so many challenging dynamics that people have had to account for and recalibrate in their experience. Yours is one of those that actually, yeah, it's just mind blowing. So I would love for you to give us an account of what this year has looked like for you, what you've navigated, how you have processed as much detail as you wish, and then I'll do some follow up afterwards.
Okay. So we'll break it down month by month here.
Sounds good.
So my 2020. January. On January 15th, my oldest son was diagnosed with cancer. He came down with he had what's called rhabdomyosarcoma, which is a rare childhood soft tissue cancer that develops usually near skeletal systems. In his case, it was in his nasal cavity. So February, we start chemo. March brings in COVID. Navigating cancer and COVID, it really didn't shake me that much in many regards, but it's still kind of like, as I look back on it, it definitely started to add a whole other level of complications to any time that my kid got sick. He had to have COVID swabs. So he's had more COVID swabs. He's had a fair number of COVID swabs while having to deal with chemotherapy and radiation therapy, which happens in May. April brought a separation from my husband. That's when I moved out, because when cancer hits, it hits very similar to how COVID hit the world, and it kind of flips everything on their head, upside on their head. June, April, May. May was daily radiation during COVID, and that had daily, every day. So every day, except for on the weekends and holidays, was when radiation therapy was supposed to happen. It was a 31-day process. So technically a month and a half is the length of time that it took for all the treatment to get through. And in that time, my son had a little mask that he had to wear, and he'd be perfectly still for 20 minutes. And at the time he was 8, so, imagine telling an 8-year-old be perfectly still for 20 minutes. It's a lot of them don't expect kids to be able to be that still, but you have to be, because radiation therapy is so precise. Because if not, then you get the radiation in places that you don't want it. And because his cancer was in his head, there's brain concerns, and his eye is very integrated with his eye. So there's lots to watch for. It's like, I look back, it's like, oh, that is so stressful. June, July. July, I think, is when he beat cancer. Was when we got the MRI stating that he was cancer free. I may have to double check that timeline, because this year is just like, it feels like it's not been just a year. It's been way more than that. Yeah. But yeah, there's just like more cancer things. There's a lot of that, and then separation things. And the last past couple months have been fairly decent in regards to that, but there's still just like, still dealing with COVID. Like, second wave of COVID's coming through, and all the stress that brings. Because just kind of like put things in perspective. In January, when we started in January, February, when we started the chemotherapy, if my son gets a fever, that's an instant hospital trip. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts. At some point, you got to call the hospital and you have to go, because his immune system is compromised. That if it's a fever, it's typically bacterial, which means because his immune system, depending on where his blood counts are, it can ravage his system and it could kill him. So when COVID hit, like, I'd already been in isolation a few times prior to, like, practicing isolation. You go to the clinic, they wear the gowns and all those things, which is why when COVID hit and I started seeing these measures being taken place at the medical clinics or the doctors, it was like, oh, that's what this is like. I was like, I'm already used to this, but I can see where, like, that really was upsetting to people and stuff like that. So yeah, it's been a bit of an adventure. I think I hope I recapped that decently enough. I feel like I may have missed some things, but It's been a lot.
So when you're looking back on this year of immense challenges that you're facing, um, which ones in hindsight do you look back and say, I'm not sure how I got through that one, but here I am. I'm not sure how I made it through this.
The early stages of being told that my kid had cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Like I am I look back at that now as just like, there were a lot of
Mm-hmm.
there were tears, but I was in like adrenaline mode.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because like so kind of to give a glimpse into how we found the tumor, is we originally started noticing in November of 2019 that, my son's his left eye, his right eye, it was kind of angry, like it kind of looked like it's pink eye or whatever. And we decided that, we took him to the general physicians twice. There was they thought it was like a little sty in his eye that was causing blockage and was causing it to be puffy and irritable, and it was just like a little infection. So a
Yeah.
couple eye drops, uh, antibiotics for the eye, and we put those in. But I thought it cleared up, but then it didn't, because a couple days after we'd stopped the antibiotics and the teardrops, the teacher was like, his eyes all goopy again, and um, maybe we should, I'd like you to take him home. And so again, we go to the physician, and it's just like, oh no, you just put a heat compress on it, put a heat compress. And at this point, we're getting to December, and his eye is like, it's puffy, like it's starting to puff. And by the time Christmas came around and we got like really, really sick, we all got like this really crazy flu for Christmas. But like my son's eye was like starting to like bulge out of its socket. And at this point, we're like, okay, we need to take him to the optometrist. Like he needs to see an eye doctor,
Mm-hmm.
because whatever is going on with the general physicians, and it's not their fault that they didn't clue into what was going on. So we went to the optometrist, and he's like, this eye is really swollen. Um, and then he thought, because they checked the vision was fine, and so he thought it was just like an infection around the orbit. But what he wanted was to set me up with a specialist to look at the eye. And we're like, okay. So we book in the appointment with a specialist about like at the end of December, early January, and yeah, it was end of early January was when we went to go see the specialist. And he ordered an MRI because he looked at the eye and he was like, okay, I just want to make sure that it's actually like the orbit that is causing the issue here. So we're going to get an MRI, and we'll convene after that. So we go, get the MRI. It's really, really loud, but my son did really like, there was some screaming involved with that, because it was loud. But they said he did really good for it overall, and like they gave him like a little plushie, and he got this little doll that has great significance. I'll explain more about that one later. But 3 days later, the eye specialist calls us in, to meet, and I go up, like my ex is working, and so I take my kid into the specialist, and I'm sitting there across from him, and he goes, "There's a mess in your son's head. It's in his nasal cavity, and I've sent it to the children's hospital for them to review it. Um, they should be getting in touch with you soon," because he wasn't allowed to tell me it was cancer. He wasn't allowed to make that call yet, because it's just a mass.
Yeah.
And I'm driving home, and I'm just like weeping. I'm just like, okay, my brain's going in possibility mode. So like there's two possibilities here. There's one, it is just like this really big booger that just needs to get pulled out of his nose or drained or something like that. Or worst case scenario, it's cancer. By As I'm driving home, Children's Hospital calls me, and I answer the phone, and they're like, "We need you to come up to the hospital." And I'm like, okay, that's fine. When would you like to do that? And he's like, well, tonight or tomorrow morning. I'm like, what the fuck? Excuse my language. I was just like, it was just like,
Good.
it was just like, okay, I have to go to the hospital now.
Yeah.
I like, this is a big deal. Like, the things are starting to fall. So by the time I got home, my family doctor was already rushing in through the door, and Mike had got called in from work. Mike's the name of my ex. He got called in from work, and the family doctor kind of goes over what they think it is, and they think that he's just like, a lot of doctors are very concerned about this tumor or this mass in your kid's head, and what this is my guess that it's this kind of cancer, and but like a lot of that talk I don't remember. It was just like this blur of emotions because it was just like, I have to go do this. I have to do this. I have to get my kid to the hospital. And it happened so fast. It was like this storm that came through and just blew my world apart.
Yeah.
And yeah, like, that night I packed up my stuff. We went to Children's Hospital.
Yeah.
And the nasal specialist takes a look, and she gets this little light, and she looks up his nose. And she's like, yeah, I can see this. I can see it. I can see it. I can see the mass protruding out through his nose. And I was just like, oh, really? And so, yeah, I was just, and, by just kind of like a measurement too, is like when we got to the hospital, the ophthalmologist, they did a lot of watch with his eye. His eye had a 17 millimeter protrusion out of its socket.
Wow.
And that's a lot. Wow. I look back at pictures of it back then. It's just like, yeah, like it was just, it's unreal. And that was, there's nothing, that was completely, all that was out of my control. That all I could do was just go on to the next right step, which is basically like Frozen 2 came out, and yeah, that one song where Anna loses Olaf because Elsa got frozen by going too deep into the river, and Olaf just kind of like puffs, and then the way that Anna basically like has a little meltdown. Basically, she's like, she's lost everything, and she doesn't know what to do, and she doesn't know what she can do, but she knows she has to get up and keep going because she just needs to get going and keep doing the next right thing. And that's basically where I went. Like, it's just, everything was very dark, and my son was diagnosed with cancer, and I just had to keep doing the next right thing because that's all I could. I just saw it as the only thing I could do. It's the only thing I had control over in that particular instance. So looking back at those particular moments and being like, I got through that with a lot of grace and a lot of strength.
Yeah. That's intense.
Yeah. It was very, very, very intense. But yeah, the little plushie that after the first MRI, he was given the option of getting two things. And one of them was this giant teddy bear, and the other one was this itty bitty tiny white plushie. And the nurse was so confused to why he picked the little one over the big one. And as soon as I saw it, I knew exactly why. One of his favorite movies is Wall-E, and the little
Evie.
The little white plushie is Eve. Was it Eve? And that little stuffy has basically been with him throughout all of it. When he had his radiation mask done, the nurses were super sweet, and apparently for kids they dress them up. Yeah. They dress up the little masks, and so Eve, they she decorated his mask to look like Eve. So that whole movie is just kind of taken on a whole different meaning for me now, because it basically was one of those things that helped my kid get through a lot of these really tough early stages of cancer. So
Thank you for sharing that.
no problem.
You spend a lot of time at the hospital with him.
Mm-hmm.
You not only watched his progress, but also that of those in that community in the hospital. Like there's a guild, it sounds like, or just a connecting that happened with others who are in similar instances at the children's hospital with
Yeah.
children going through various things. What are you taking away from that?
I'm I I'm thankful for the support and the community and charities. Like, not only while at the same time while we were getting assaulted with the fact that our kid had cancer, all of these charities that I like wasn't aware of or didn't know about, they basically came out of the woodwork to support. There's the Run for Gold. It's the Victory Foundation. Sorry. There's Helping Families with Cancer is a foundation that actually was started and established by a high school peer. That help that their intent is to help you with the financial problems that can come up with having a kid with cancer and having all those hospital visits and all those things. Like and I reached out to a few to a Facebook group that had moms in Calgary that were having children with cancer, and like having those things it made me not feel alone. Like it wasn't something that I had to face alone. There's support. There are shoulders to lean on. There is like even my son, one of his helpers that helped him when he was in like grade 2 and 1. She started a fundraiser for us. I had a ton of community support. It was just like, all this bad, but it was just like this. It was met with a insane large, like a wave almost as big of all this good love and support as well. And I am just super grateful for it. And it made me swallow a lot of my pride, because there's like, I'm a very independent individual. So accepting help has been a very difficult thing for me a lot of time, because I just want to like tough up and I can do this and look how strong I am. And as soon as I got the diagnosis, it's just like, I'm done with that. Like I can't do this. Like this is something I don't think I could do by myself. And I'm super thankful for the communities and the charities that popped out of the woodwork that made it so that I didn't have to face it alone, and that I had extra support and stuff.
It's sure, as I hear that, it just inspires in me that kind of renewed boost of optimism in reference to the goodness that is in humans.
Oh yes,
Not
there was
always
a
there.
lot. Yeah, not always there, but there's still a lot.
Trixie, as you grappled with a lot of these big things that are beyond your control or ability to say, I feel like I'm in my element here. You're like feeling helpless, right? Um, did your like did the existence of your son's that he's still alive, like did life take on any new meaning for you in its frailty and its momentariness? Did it hit you in a way that you're like, huh, I didn't see this before, but I've got a new perception on what this looks like to be alive?
I do. Like that totally that definitely uh definitely hit. And especially when because I'm in the community or you kind of like get to see other kids going through the fight as well. Um like I feel extremely lucky and not that really luck had anything to do with it, but like that my son managed to beat his cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Um there were moments like there were other children that I got to see that didn't win their fight. I got to see their progress on the Facebook group. Um, and the one that kind of stands out the most was like, yeah, there's this little girl, and she like when I passed her by, she was just like peace, or like she had the no hair on her head, and she was just like peacefully sleeping while she was getting her chemo.
Mm-hmm.
And like you get to learn a little bit about their stories for as the mom shares, so I don't really want to share too much about like her experience, but like they flew her out to Toronto for special treatments. And there's one photo that they posted that this girl looked like she was full of life, she was excited, she was at Niagara Falls. And then the next one was her on the hospital bed, and we were being told that she wasn't going to make it until the morning. And it was just heartbreaking. You really feel for those. And it's just like, that's when like the gravity really hit me in many ways. Like, not only like, it's like, this is a deadly disease. Like, this kills. And, you know, I snuggle my kid whenever I get the chance. I don't want to have like petty custody fights and visitation fights because my son,
Yeah.
he's around still and he should be able to see his dad. He not that that's my main motivation for doing that, but like
It informs.
his moments are precious and his experiences are precious. And so like we had um the other act of kindness is just like, if he wants something, I'm he kind of gets a little bit of a more free pass on those. Like I really want to foster his interest. I really want to foster the things that he's passionate about because like he could have not I might not have had I might not have been able to have that opportunity. So it's just like, you take them and their desires, their wishes, their and you just kind of like understand that how precious that is that you get to like this opportunity to help foster and encourage sorry um someone who's actually had to like go through that. Like he weathered all that chemo really well. Like he didn't get super sick. He had some constipation. He's only had 2 fevers, but that's not always the case. And like there's a few experiences that again they just let me know that just like how vast that experience is for people, and that you know I'm so extremely grateful for um, my experiences, and that my experience story so far doesn't end with loss.
Absolutely. And I've met him. He's a sweet, sweet child. Trixie, as you are in this current moment going forward, we were talking in the previous attempt at our podcast that got cut short about some of the things that shifted for you. Like once upon a time, you wanted to be a marine biologist. There was a time when you also wanted to do a couple other things along the way, like an accountant and oil and gas. You were involved in photography too, but you were mentioning you've got some new commitments or goals on your radar. Tell us a little bit about what you're hoping to move into as you're enjoying this fantastic outcome with your son beating cancer and what that is. awoken in you by way of here's what I think I want to leave by way of impact?
Mm. So I do want to write a children's book. Um, Primarily, I want to write write children's books that are geared towards things like dealing with cancer, with emotion, with the big emotions that young kids have. Um, that a lot sometimes I feel like as adults we kind of like we were either raised to downplay them or we were raised to put them down, like, you know, don't cry, or I'll give you a reason to cry for, or, it's okay to be scared and how to deal with those instead of like, it's like, don't be scared, like suck it up, or those kind of parenting voices are very much so very alive in my head when I was going through a lot of some of these things. Like, but like, I kind of want to like take a page from Inside Out, but I want to gear it towards much younger children because I feel like there's not a lot that out there right now that validates those big emotions for small children. Um, and cancer is a big one because like sometimes I wonder if my son actually understood the gravity of the illness that he fought and that he had to go through. And and because COVID too, like there's not a lot because of obvious reasons. We all have everybody in that moms group. We didn't have any social gatherings. We didn't have get-togethers where we could meet in person and the kids could meet in person. I think there were a few virtual campfires that I wasn't able to attend for that, but like, yeah, I want to highlight the journey and I get it in a book form of things that kids may experience during cancer and be able to like be able to look at a book and be like, oh, this is me, or I'm validated in being terrified right now because this is scary, and help bring comfort that there are people out there that understand the big emotions that they're going through and are willing to support them, and how that can look coming from other sources. Because I did a few quick searches on books that are kind of similar ilk, and there were ones that had dealt with like moms having cancer, but I didn't really see a lot that had the children with cancer, and I think that's because childhood cancer is just it's a heartbreaking experience.
Last couple of minutes here, Trixie. I want to do a couple of things. One, I want to say thank you, but before I say thank you, I want to ask, is there a way that those who are interested in getting in touch with you can get in touch with you? Is there like a connection? Yeah, is there some way that they can reach out and say, hey, how can I help facilitate this book endeavor, for example, or talk about my experience?
Um, I don't really have like a super public. Well, I do
You know what?
have.
How about if I have them get in touch with me and I'll connect you with them?
Yeah, that could work. But they can just also find my Facebook too. If that, I just make sure that when they add, there's a message that is accompanying that states that I heard your story. This is what I'd like to talk about, or just kind of reach out and properly introduce yourself. But yeah, my Facebook is Beatrix Bitter Barnes, bitter dash Barnes. Sorry, and they can
Yes.
use that.
Trixie, thank you so much for being vulnerable, for sharing that gift with us and me and my audience. It was pretty raw, and yet I think it also hits in a really important way that helps reflection by way of saying, hey, moments in life aren't guaranteed.
Hmm.
Savor and enjoy them while you can. Thank you for being a part of the Bincast where small talk comes to die. Guys,
Thank
I will
you for
see you.
having me.
You're so welcome. See you all soon.